Welcome back to Stories Behind the Scrubs, where we dive into the world of medicine through the stories and experiences of those on the front lines. I'm Jada, and I'm here with my co-host, Emlyn.
Each episode, we have the privilege of sitting down with inspiring individuals from all walks of the medical field, whether it's child life specialists, paramedics, medical students, or practicing physicians. We chat with them about their careers, personal journeys, challenges, triumphs, and everything in between.
Today, we're joined by Roland Lee, a medical student at University of Louisville School of Medicine, who's here to share his unique path in medicine and give us a peek into what it's really like to be a third-year medical student balancing academics, clinical rotations, and being his cohort's class president.
All right, what's up, you all? How y'all doing?
We're doing well. How are you?
Doing fantastic. Life's great. Finally done with the semester.
There we go. That's what we like
Oh
to
my
hear.
gosh. I know. Just finished OBGYN. So
Oh, really?
yeah, I know.
Are you doing like rounds yet?
Yeah, so we did some rounding on pediatrics. So I've done pediatrics, psych, family med, and OBGYN. There's not that much rounding on OBGYN just in the morning when you're on surgery, but for peds, there's rounding every day if you're inpatient.
Interesting. Okay.
Mhm.
That's
Yeah,
great.
but
Yeah, we just finished our semester as well. So that's
nice.
good.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, what
Yeah.
where are you all?
We're second year.
Second year? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So, yeah. Well, first of all, I just want to say welcome to the podcast. This is kind of a special episode for us because usually we ask our guests to come onto our podcast, and then that's kind of how they get introduced to, what we're doing. But this is a little bit different because you've been following us for a while before this. So this is actually our first time interviewing someone who's like already kind of acquainted with the podcast. So we just kind of wanted to ask you, like, just to start off, how did you find our podcast? And, like, how did you kind of decide that this is something that you wanted to do with us?
Yeah. So this is an interesting situation. I'm the president of our med school class, and during our second year, there's something that we do called suture clinic, where we go to a plastic surgeon's house, and he invites us all to his basement. He just has like so much different equipment to like help you fine tune your suturing skills, and he hosts people every single week. So whenever I was there, I was just talking to him, and then Johnny Kim came up. He's like a super fan, like a Johnny Kim super fan. And he was like telling me, hey, what if you all brought Johnny Kim as a commencement speaker? Whenever you graduate, like I don't really leave my house very much. I'm like super old. He's like 80 something years old, like retired and all that stuff. But he was like, I would like actually come, I would host him, I would do everything. Like if you can actually get him on, he's like a living legend, right? And so I started doing my research. I like tried to reach out to him. He's like impossible to get a hold of. And then I was like listening to all his podcasts, and then your all's podcast came up. So I was like, wait, how did these two high school girls get Johnny Kim on their podcast? Like, I need to figure out what their secret was. And so I listened to the podcast and all that stuff, and I was like, okay, let me just reach out, let me just DM you all. And I guess the rest is history.
Yeah, that was kind of crazy because like I remember I was walking from, one of my classes. I don't even remember what it was, but one of my classes to the library, and I got this message from you. I was like, what the heck? Like, who is
This is
this?
great,
Oh, like, this
dude.
is crazy.
Yeah.
But we're super excited to have you on the podcast. This is a little bit different because now Emily and I are both in college. So everything before this has been, kind of a high school view of the pre-med track. But just for our high school listeners, we do still want to start off in high school. So can you talk a little bit about your high school experience and kind of what your plans for the future were looking at that time?
Sure. So I guess in high school, I was still trying to figure out like who I was as a person. Like, I feel like in high school, everyone's still growing, everyone's kind of like a little lost still. So that's kind of where I was, but I always had medicine on the back of my mind. The science classes always stood out to me. I love doing community service. That was like my big thing in high school. And so it was natural for me to like want to go and go on the pre-med track whenever I was in college. And so that's kind of what I shaped my high school experience around in my college experience, I guess. But I definitely wasn't all in. Like I had so many arguments with my parents. They wanted me to like do something else or whatever, but I was like pretty headstrong. I mean, I'm Asian, and so they kind of pressured me a little bit, you know how it is, but overall, I think I was still pretty open-minded in high school, and was just trying to figure out who I was.
I see. I think that's definitely something a lot of people can relate to, sort of growing up, and it's like, well, you don't really know you want to pursue medicine, but you always gravitate towards science classes.
Mhm.
So I couldn't quite tell like if you were cemented on it by the end of high school. But why don't we talk a little bit more about like sort of where you went to undergrad and how your I guess affinity for medicine sort of grew and changed there.
Yeah, so I went to the University of Louisville for undergrad. That's my hometown. Um,
Sorry, can I just ask how do you pronounce it?
it's Louisville. I know people say like Louisville, Louisville, and stuff like that, but if you're from Louisville, people say Louisville, and so that's how you know you're not from here if you say it some other way.
Louisville. Okay, great.
Louisville, yeah,
Thanks
yeah,
for
yeah.
clarifying.
But anyways, I think my passion for medicine really started after I went abroad, actually. So going into my sophomore year of college, I got the chance to go back to Vietnam, which is where my family's from, for the very first time. And a lot of my family back in Vietnam are doctors. One's an ENT surgeon, one's an orthopedic surgeon, one's like a family medicine practitioner. And I didn't really know much about medicine at the time. Like I hadn't really shadowed very much. I kind of just knew what I knew from like TV and stuff like that. But that was like my first real chance to kind of see what medicine was like. And I just saw a lot of people that were struggling. I really felt connected to what my aunts and uncles were doing when I was in Vietnam. And then whenever I came back, I started to get more involved in undergrad, especially with service. I feel like it always made me feel so good to be able to help the community out. And I knew that that's something that I wanted to do in the future as well. And I think what really, really, really cemented the fact that I wanted to go to med school, I actually had imposter syndrome. Like I took a whole gap year, like I pushed my MCAT back and all that stuff. But what really cemented it was when I took my gap year, I was part of the Fulbright program. And so I lived in Taiwan for a year, teaching English over there. And everyone that lives in Taiwan, they get free healthcare. And so I spent as much time as possible, like in the hospital, trying to like take advantage of the free healthcare. But at the same time, I was able to connect a lot with a lot of the doctors over there, and I was kind of inspired by what they were doing. So that was kind of my path through undergrad and how I kind of grew my love for medicine and wanting to apply. I almost applied to pharmacy school because my imposter syndrome was that bad, but I'm glad it all worked out at the end of the day.
Yeah, it sounds like you had a really kind of formative experience while you're overseas. But I do kind of want to like take a step back and just ask, what were some of the, I guess, when you were looking for your colleges, because that's where we're at right now.
Mhm.
So we just went through the process of, trying to figure out where you want to apply, and then, getting those acceptances back and trying to figure out which schools we really want to attend. So we'll talk about this later with the medical school process as well. But specifically for undergrad, why did you choose the college that you chose, and what were some of the major factors that made you decide on that path?
Yeah, so number one, I'm really close to my family, so I knew I wanted to be somewhere nearby. And the second reason was, I mean, financials. I was able to get a really good scholarship at U of L. My dream school was actually UK, which is like the rival school, like 75 miles away. But I decided to go to U of L just because the financials, I was close to home. And I also I'm the oldest of like 20, 30 cousins as well. So I wanted to be near them and kind of help guide them as well. And I knew that if I was too far away from them, it would have been harder to do that.
Yeah, I think it's very cool that you not only consider like necessarily what your dream school was, but also taking on that mentorship role. And that's definitely something that I wanted to talk about a little bit later on,
Mhm.
especially as you're navigating medicine now, sort of the role that mentorship has played for you. But in the meantime, you sort of talked about that you've had like imposter syndrome, and that's something you dealt with during your time in college. Uh, how are you able to manage or first let's talk about like sort of what was your major and like your area of study, and then how were you able to manage like taking personal time and like managing your stress on top of like all these pre-med like requisites.
Yeah, so starting off, I was a biology major and I minored in Chinese. I was taking Chinese since high school, so I knew that I wanted to keep studying that. And just to clarify the second question, you're asking how I managed like the stress of school on top of like having to do extracurriculars. I mean, it was definitely hard. I think for me, I always prioritized the things that I love. I know whenever you're a pre-med, they make you check a bunch of boxes, right? But that's not really who I am. Like I didn't really have much research experience. Like I mentioned before, I didn't have much clinical experience, but I really, really loved being in different leadership roles, and I loved community service, and I loved helping out in the community. And so that's really what I prioritize. And I think if you're able to, in my opinion, for me, it helped keep me sane because I was doing what I actually loved. And I think when people get burnt out, it's because they're not finding joy in what they're doing. And so for me, I knew I had to do school. Like I loved my classes and stuff like that. I had great teachers. But I knew that I wasn't much of a researcher. And so I didn't really focus on that. And that's what I came to find out later is that people don't really care if you're checking off every box. They really care about what you bring to the table and who you really are. Right. And so I was able to, whenever I was applying to medical school, really talk about the things that I love doing. And they can tell that I like genuinely love doing that. And I think that's what made me stand out more so as an applicant than me checking off every single box and not doing a great job at a few things or just doing it because they said I had to do it, right? So I guess that's kind of how I balance things in undergrad. Yeah, you still have to like do well in classes, but I think just being able to prioritize things really helped me with that.
Yeah, I really like how you mentioned that it's not so much, trying to check those boxes, but just finding something that you really are interested in and passionate in. I feel like that's something I resonate with a lot because I have one student org that I'm a part of where it's like the people who are in that org are like, you spend all your time with us, like you need to find something else to do with your life. But at the end of the day, it's like the one thing that I really like doing with them.
Yeah.
And so it's like that's kind of the way that I manage my stress is I take on more responsibility within that org. And it's not, what a lot of people envision when they say you need to manage your stress and take personal time for hobbies. But I think it's cool that we're able to find stuff like that, where it's like you're still kind of moving towards your passion and what you want to do with your life, but it's also like kind of doubling as a way to manage your stress.
I think a lot of pre-meds are definitely like that too. That's where a lot of the imposter syndrome comes in, is because they think they have to be the best at everything. But that's
Right.
not really the case. You just have to be the best at what you actually love doing. And I think that resonates and makes you a much stronger applicant at the end of the day. And also it helps with burnout. It like makes you feel good that you're doing what you love. And there's actually a Japanese term. It's called ikigai. Have you all ever heard of that?
No.
So ikigai, it's a Japanese term that means like reason for being, and there's four components to it to find like that perfect job for you. The first one is doing what you love. The second one is doing what you're good at. The third part of it is doing what will help better the world. And then the fourth one is, what you can get paid for, which I mean, like at the end of the day, you're looking for a job. People say that like, don't worry about the money or whatever, but it is like important as well.
Right. I think that actually perfectly encapsulates like what we want to do and like our path into going into medicine. But I also wanted to ask, so you said that you were involved in a lot of extracurricular activities and you had that one thing that you really liked, which was service. But what were some of the opportunities that you took advantage of in undergrad? We also saw that you were part of a fraternity. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, so I think most of my opportunities came from being in that fraternity. And I think it helped having those upperclassmen mentors. I know we'll talk about mentorship later, but they kind of paved the way to helping me figure out like what I wanted to do in undergrad, because I had a lot of role models and I wanted to be just like them, right? So a lot of the things I did included a lot of like on-campus jobs. I was able to meet so many cool people doing that. Having on-campus leadership positions like through Raise Red, which is like a dance marathon for cancer research. I was like one of those annoying orientation leaders that was getting up at 5 a.m. and dancing around, and you all probably thought we were like crackheads or something. Like doing that kind of stuff really was a big part of my undergrad experience. And then on top of that, through Sigma Chi, I was able to be involved with a lot of different philanthropy things. One of the things that I was able to kind of head was Wrap Up Louisville, where we donated a lot of blankets to the homeless community of Louisville. We were able to raise money for Raise Red through that, and Huntsman Cancer Institute as well. And then just like within the chapter, being president of my fraternity, I was able to get really close with a lot of the people, mentor a lot of people, and kind of grow in my leadership abilities through the fraternity as well.
That's very cool. I can definitely relate to the annoying orientation leader. I had my hand at, being a part of the orientation for my school this past year. Um, yeah, so it's very neat. I can't necessarily relate. Like my school doesn't have Greek life, but I think it's very cool that you're able to leverage that for a lot of interesting volunteering opportunities. I know we just talked about not checking the boxes for being a pre-med, but I'm going to check one more box, and it's the MCAT. So earlier you'd mentioned that you had pretty bad imposter syndrome, and you pushed back your MCAT and you weren't necessarily sure if med school was the right choice for you. What was sort of your thought process when you decided that you were going to pursue medicine and okay, I'm going to take the MCAT? Like, what is studying for that big exam look like for you?
Yeah. So it was a rough time, I'm not gonna lie, but I think it would have not been rough had I not been going through some relationship issues. And so that kind of that kind of put a damper on my whole MCAT studying the first time around. And so instead of studying for the MCAT, I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna take a gap year and apply for this other program instead. And thank goodness that I was able to get accepted to that and I had a plan. um, but as far as studying for the MCAT goes, it is a hard exam. It does matter. I think GPA and the MCAT, that's what kind of gets your foot in the door and gets people to read the rest of your application. But then the rest of your application, the interview, is what helps you stand out. The MCAT and the GPA is just to get your foot in the door, is what people say. Um, but studying for the MCAT is like studying for any big standardized exam. And what they really want to see from the MCAT is if you're able to do well on a standardized exam and stay committed to studying for a long period of time. Um, and so that's just kind of how it is. You just have to be consistent every single day. I think there's like a really common 3 month program that people do, consisting of like only 1 month of content review, 1 month of UWorld, and then 1 month of like full length exams in AAMC material. My brother's actually studying for the MCAT right now, so this is all like super fresh in my mind. I'm giving him like so much advice and stuff like that. And then I took step one last May, and so this kind of stuff never goes away. They just want to make sure that you're able to do it. But if you stay consistent every day, if you have a game plan, then you're just going to do well on the MCAT. But it is stressful. I know a lot of people get anxiety from it. I know I did. That's why I pushed it back a whole year. But it all ended up working out okay.
Yeah, I think the MCAT is the, one major thing that every pre-med is kind of like fearing for. But you did mention that you took a gap year, and so I do want to talk about that. So you talked about, what kind of led to you deciding to take a gap year. But we also know that gap years aren't necessarily just for, having a whole year to yourself. They want to see that you've done something during your gap year to help you grow, or kind of enhance your application into medical school. So what did you do during your gap year and how did that form your experience?
Yeah, so in my one gap year, I was part of the Fulbright program where I was teaching English in Taiwan. It was literally the best year of my life, teaching fifth and sixth graders. It was so cute. And I think I really grew the most as a person, just being away in another country and just being able to be independent. I think that really helped my growth a lot. But you're right. I think if you do a gap year or multiple gap years, I was talking to an admissions director a few weeks ago actually, and she said, "Yeah, we want to make sure that you're at least doing something productive. If you're at least still doing service, if you're at least still shadowing and showing that you are interested in medicine, then gap years can be super helpful to your application." Or if you didn't have a good GPA in undergrad and you needed something to boost it, you can do a post-bac program, you can do a master's program just to show that you are still growing as a person. And that's the same thing if in undergrad you don't do too hot in your first semester. they want to see you grow throughout the years. And so what can you do to prove that you're growing in your 1 year gap year? For me, at least, I felt like I still needed to figure out if medicine was the right path for me and to throw away my imposter syndrome. And I think being around a cohort of like-minded people, other pre-meds, I think that really solidified that I was good enough for medical school. And I got the reassurance that I needed be around other people that were applying to med school and wanted to take a gap year for the same exact reason as me.
Yeah, your gap year actually sounds like a super cool experience. I'm half Korean, and so I actually spent a year in high school teaching Korean to some American students and teaching English to some
Cool.
Korean immigrants. So I also really enjoy like the teaching aspect, and that student org that I'm a part of is also another teaching kind of we teach like EMS skills. And so I definitely enjoy the teaching as much as you do. But
So
you also
cool.
said that you talked about a little bit like how you're doing in undergrad, and that you have to, of course, have the grades in undergrad, but you can also use, your gap year to help form your experience. So I just want to talk about one more thing in undergrad before we move on, and that's what are some of the classes that you took in undergrad that you think really prepare you for medical school? Because I know a lot of the time, pre-meds are like, oh, organic chemistry, like when are we really going to use that? Or like, don't really want to take that physics class. But what are some of those classes that you took, and maybe they're just electives, maybe they're not part of the prereqs, but what were those that helped you in med school?
Yeah, I will say most of the classes that you take in undergrad aren't that helpful for med school, but there are some really useful ones. For example, all your biochem classes, you still have to take biochem in med school. And it's basically just a sped up version of what you learned in undergrad. Genetics was super helpful. I'd really recommend genetics and anatomy. I never took anatomy. And so for us, we do anatomy first. Every school does it differently. But that was kind of a shock to a lot of people at my school because no one had seen anatomy before besides that one that one girl in our class that happened to teach the class. But besides that, like nobody had ever seen anatomy, nobody had ever seen a cadaver before. So I think just your biochem classes and your genetic classes are what would be most helpful. But everything else is just have to figure it out.
I see. Yeah. I think that's sort of the experience that both Jade and I are going through now, taking these classes. And I will admit, like some of them, it's very hard to find like the relevance, hard to find the connection. But at least for me, like this semester, I've taken a lot more humanities classes, and like my school offers a minor in medical humanities. So for me, it's been very surprising to sort of undo the framework in my head of like, okay, as a pre-med, I need organic chemistry, I need physics, and then actually finding more value in, of course, you still have to take those classes, and they're still like very thorough, like very informative classes, but sort of finding the value in like alternative narratives and like different approaches to medicine has been pretty cool.
Mhm. Yeah.
In terms of like the undergraduate experience, I think it was sort of like run that dry. So if you don't mind, we can move on to medical school now. So once you graduated from U of L, you took your gap year, and then how did you decide like which medical school you wanted to go to, and what was sort of the onboarding process there?
Yeah. So I also wasn't that great about my med school application process. I only applied to one school, which don't literally, if you're listening to this, don't do what I did because I made the biggest mistakes applying to med school. But I submitted my application late. I submitted it in like July, and then I didn't submit my secondaries until like September. And my interview wasn't until January. They said they say that you should submit in like May and submit your secondaries in like July. But I was like way behind the curve because, like I was saying, I had that imposter syndrome still into whenever I was applying as well because you have to apply. I applied before I went off on my gap year. And so I didn't meet all those people and all that stuff until after that. But yeah, I only applied to one school. I don't know why I did that. To be honest, I think I was a little too lazy. I don't know, but people say you typically want to apply to like 25 to 30 schools to give yourself the best shot. But I got off the wait list and everything's worked out beautifully since then. I don't know. Just don't do what I did.
Right. So you only applied to one school. And fortunately, you got into that one school. But what are some things that you think are important looking back that we should be looking for in a medical school when we're doing our search?
So I think for the medical school you choose, I think that you can't really go wrong with a medical school. I think every single medical school has its complaints. And I know this very well because as the president of my class, I hear complaints like literally night and day. But I have a lot of friends at other medical schools too, and they have the same exact things. But I think the biggest thing that you should be looking for in a medical school are number one, if you're interested in a certain specialty, check what the match rates for those specialties are at that school. That might mean that they have better networking there, they have better connections, they have more research opportunities for that specialty you're applying to, and that's just going to help you out with the journey to your dream specialty. I think also you just kind of want to see the culture of the school as well. If you talk to people at the school, figure out if it's more competitive or more collaborative because you want people that will push you to be better. You want people that aren't going to be stingy about their resources. You want people that are going to want to help push each other up and work together to, make all of our dreams possible, right? And I think the third thing is if you do get accepted to a lot of medical schools, I know financials are super important, but you are able to leverage multiple acceptances if you do get into multiple schools. For example, if you get into school A, for example, and they give you say you get into like three schools, right? For the first school, they don't give you any scholarship money. The second school, they give you 5,000. The third school, they give you 10,000. You can tell school A that school C gave you $10,000. Like financials are really important. Can you do anything to help out? And most of the time, they will want to help out if they really like you as an applicant. And so I know some people at my school that were able to get a full ride just because they were able to leverage their multiple acceptances. So financials is a super important thing as well. Fourth thing, location. Fifth thing is curriculum. I think if you're able to go to a school that is pass fail over honors, high pass, I think it gives you a lot more opportunities to focus on what you want to do instead of being so focused on just school. Because right now with step one being pass fail, there's so much emphasis on your extracurriculars and you really want to be able to have time to do research, have time to do service, have time to do leadership stuff. So I think that is something to consider in this day and age as well. Before step was pass fail, it didn't really matter as much because all that mattered was your step score. But it's so much more holistic now than ever before. Sorry, that was super long winded.
No, that was good. I think that's exactly what we were looking for. Because, when we're looking for our undergrad schools, we have a list of boxes that we want to check. Not necessarily for us, but just, what does the school offer? What can we get into? But for medical school, we haven't really started that process yet. So it's good to kind of hear from you what we should be looking for. You did mention earlier that there's a match process. And I believe that's to get into your residency. So can you just describe to our listeners like what the match process is and kind of how that works?
Yeah, so the match process, it's a little complicated, but essentially, whenever you figure out the specialty that you want to apply to, right? You like put your name in, you apply to a bunch of different residencies, you have those interviews for those residencies, and then afterwards you're able to rank the programs and then they rank you. And so there's like a very complicated algorithm to where it'll match you based on where you rank the institution and where the institution ranks you. For example, if you both put each other number one, then great, you got a spot at that institution. But if you rank this institution number one and then they rank you like 60, then you're not a perfect match for each other. And so I don't know how this algorithm works exactly, but they won a Nobel Prize for it. And so it's like a super complicated algorithm. There's like so much math that goes into it, but essentially they take the numbers on where both of you rank out of all of the applicants, and then you just on match day you open up an envelope and it tells you where you're going to be for your entire residency.
Yeah, that seems very high stakes, but I always knew it was a complicated process, but to hear that I mean, there's an algorithm, and the algorithm was, supported enough that it's won a Nobel Prize. At least for me, helps assuage some like anxieties there, which maybe it's too early to be anxious about. But a little bit more about your medical school experience. So I'm willing to guess that like once you got into medical school, did you have more of a feeling of like belongingness? Did that imposter syndrome sort of lurk when you sort of like got to know some of your peers and see like, who else got into the same school as you? And then also you mentioned that when you're looking for medical schools, it's important to see if it's more of a collaborative or a competitive environment. How is the U of L School of Medicine? Where does that sort of stand?
Yeah, honestly, I have loved medical school 500 times more than undergrad. I loved my undergrad experience. Like, don't get me wrong, but you're around so many like-minded people that all have the same goal. You're learning the coolest things ever. Like, not many people can say that you're dissecting a cadaver, you're like in clinic working with real people. And I don't know, there's something special about doing something through difficult, like doing something so difficult with a group of people. Like there's something about that that makes you closer with your classmates as well. And I think since U of L isn't like a super top tier school, we kind of do have to lean on each other a lot. And so that's what I've loved most about U of L as well, is that we really, really do help each other out. We have a Google Drive where we share all sorts of resources, and it's like very active as well. Our GroupMe is always popping off with like different tips and stuff like that on how to do well on exams, different clubs to be a part of. Like we really, really do care about building people up and helping each other with research and stuff like that. So overall, I have absolutely loved medical school. Like there's so many different opportunities, and it feels special getting closer and closer to that finish line that you've been fighting to get to for so long.
Yeah, something you said piqued my attention, and I realized that as a high schooler, as an undergraduate student, we have the chance to like talk with different medical professionals, and all these people have gone to medical school. I've talked with a handful of medical students, and I realized just based on like your response here that I don't think I understand what the environment of medical school looks like. Like in my head, it's more you spend the majority of your time studying, and it's either you're studying or you're recovering from studying. But I think earlier you mentioned you talked about like extracurriculars and research and stuff like that and clubs. Like that, to me, that's very surprising to hear that those sort of things are maintained throughout medical school. So if you could talk a little bit more about that and maybe what you do currently.
Sure. Yeah. So I think that was something that was surprising for me too, because I also was under the impression that you had no time besides studying. But no, there's actually so many different things, at least from a U of L perspective. We call them RSOs, or recognized student organizations. And so they're really supportive of you starting your own organization. So there's a lot of like different interest groups, like the dermatology interest group, emergency medicine interest group, and stuff like that for different specialties. And you're going to apply to be the presidents of those clubs as well. I think that's something that every single school has. But there's also different things too, where you can be the director of different clinics, where you go out to the community and have student run clinics with them too, and they have physicians helping you run those. And so you get a lot of direct patient care by doing that as well, especially for the underserved communities. There's also like student council, of course, where um, you host events like balls. I know every single school has their own balls. For us, we have Cadaver Ball for Halloween, and then we have Caduceus Ball, which is like our medical school prom in the winter. I know like we have a lot of things with like other schools as well. For example, with the medical school and the law school, we have something called like the medical malpractice ball. So like there's a lot of fun things outside of just studying all day, because we kind of need it, right? Because or else we'll just get burnt out. And there's also a lot of different mentorship opportunities as well. There's, at least at U of L, there's something called Project Heal, where you go into high schools and you kind of show them what the process to getting into medicine is like, and showing them the basics, like how to put in a chest tube, how to intubate, how to do CPR and stuff like that. Really, like I think most schools are super supportive of you starting your own club if you want to do that. The only issue is like, do you have the time to do that? And a lot of people do make the time because it is worth it at the end of the day. Some of the things that I'm involved with, what takes up the most of my time is my leadership role as the president of the class. So I'm not able to do as much outside of it besides that. But that's been a super rewarding experience. I'm so much closer to my classmates, and I've built really, really strong connections with a lot of the professors and administration because of that. I'm also involved in, I started at APAMSA, which is the Asian Pacific American Medical Student Association, which is like a national organization for Asian American students. We didn't have that at U of L at the time. And I just feel like it was important for us to like get connected and support each other just because a lot of people from like California and states where they're used to being around a lot of Asians, they came to Louisville, which you can imagine in Kentucky, there's not very many Asians. And they kind of were, feeling a little bummed out by not having that community. So I started that as well. And then just on the undergrad campus, doing a lot of mentoring there as well. Those are kind of the big things that I'm involved with outside of school and research. And also the distinction in business and leadership too. At U of L, there's different distinction tracks. For example, distinction in business and leadership, distinction in medical education, distinction in research, distinction in health equity, maybe one more, but there's also different tracks that you can join as well too. So if you really want to specialize in something like that, once you're done with medical school, then that kind of gives you the upper hand in having a little background in those kind of things too, and having the mentors as well.
Yeah, it sounds like you guys have a ton of opportunities and a lot of fun extracurriculars, and that you're involved in a lot as well. But you also mentioned, and how we met you is because you are the class president of your class. So how do you become the class president, and what are some of the responsibilities that you have in addition to, everything else that you have to do in medical school?
Yeah. So first off, how you're elected, it's kind of like how any other election goes. For us, it was at the beginning of our first year, so we didn't really know each other that well yet. And you can kind of tell who's wanting to run because they're bringing like donuts to class and like trying to talk to everybody, shaking all sorts of hands and stuff like that. So I only ran because I ran like very last minute, but I just like loved my class so much, and I just decided to do it just to see if I had a chance or whatever, and it ended up working out, I guess. I don't know why they trusted me, honestly, but it all ended up working out. But yeah, there's just an election at the beginning of the year, and then everyone in your class votes basically, and then you kind of have to give a speech, you have to give a platform on why you like deserve to be the president or whatever. And then there's a vote after that. Some of my responsibilities, we have a whole like executive council. There's like the vice president, there's the treasurer, there's the like service chair. There's like a bunch of different chairs. And so you kind of have to head that kind of group. And how I see the president role is kind of more like a steering wheel where you're guiding your class where they want to go. I think that's kind of been the most important role for me is having a positive attitude, and if somebody wants something done, directing them towards like how they can get that done basically. And besides that, just hearing all the complaints and trying to address as much as possible.
Yeah, so we're going to start shifting into where you are in your medical school journey right now. But before we do that, I just want to ask one more question about med school as a whole. And that's just, can you kind of describe what the medical school process is like? I know usually the first and second year are more like didactic, and then your third and fourth involve more like clinical rotations. But can you just kind of describe what you've been doing in your first and second year, and then we'll move into where you are right now?
Yeah, so you're completely right. Like most traditional schools, its first 2 years is didactics, and then the last 2 years are clinicals. However, there's like a shift in that right now. Now that step is past fail, a lot of schools are shifting to only 1.5 years didactic, and then 2.5 years clinical. So that's something to look out for whenever you're applying to med schools as well. But yeah, my first and second years, I was probably studying like 8 to 10 hours every single day, doing my Anki cards, watching lectures. There's a saying that you're gonna hear so many times, but it's like trying to drink out of a fire hose, just because there's so much content thrown at you. But what I've realized is that it's just so important to know what's important and what's not, because it's just so impossible to know everything. And that's just kind of what I prioritize my first 2 years, is just trying to synthesize as much of the most important things as possible. And so, yeah, like first 2 years, you do have to make a lot of sacrifices. It is very hard to make time for things outside of school, definitely. But you do have some time if you do manage your time well, I will say.
That's very interesting. I never sort of drew the connection between step one being pass fail and making that didactic portion shorter. Like I didn't realize there was a correlation there, but I guess it makes sense because like you had mentioned earlier, people you don't have to spend as much time like hyper focused on like making perfect scores to make that perfect score on the step one.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, so now that you've wrapped up like that portion of your like medical school process, and you're going into like clinical, um, after taking step one, what do you think has been, I guess, the most challenging part of transitioning from preclinical to like the clinical section?
Yeah, so at least the school part is way easier. I feel like what you have to know isn't as much of the little details, but it's more so clinical reasoning. And I think that comes a lot more naturally to a lot of medical students. But I think the biggest transition for me, at least, is just the work hours. I know every school is different, but a lot of the times they want you working very similar hours to what the residents work. Of course, you don't have to do as much as what the residents do. You don't have as much in the line. You're just there to learn. But that has been the most draining part. And then having to go home and study a little bit afterwards. It's not as much studying, but you still have to study afterwards. Um, and then I think the other most challenging part is that you switch so frequently. And so for us, my first semester, all my rotations were 6 weeks long. So right when I'm starting to get into the groove of it, I'm switching to another rotation. So it is a lot of like adjusting to a lot of different people and what they like, and just completely shifting your mind in terms of like the specialty as well.
Yeah, so we just kind of talked about the transition and how you had to adjust a lot during your rotations. But what's something that you wish you had done during, those first 2 years or during that didactic portion that you wish you knew to better prepare you for what clinical rotations were like?
I wished I would have shadowed more, honestly, because I think if I had a better understanding of the specialty I wanted to go to before third year, I think it would have helped me a lot in terms of the stress there. But also just getting more experience, seeing how physicians like to interact with patients, and seeing and just like kind of being in the clinical environment. I think I would have transitioned a lot better if I did shadow more in my first 2 years. But I was stuck in the books. I was stuck doing extracurriculars and stuff like that. But if you do have extra free time, I would definitely prioritize that, and networking as well.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could expand on that just a little bit because Um, I think shadowing is something that people talk about basically as soon as you declare that you're even remotely interested in pre-med, like, okay, you should go shadow. You should go shadow. Oh, you have free time over your winter break. Okay, maybe you should go shadow. And for me, I have a bit of shadowing experience, but for you, like how would you get the most out of your experience? Because in my own like personal shadowing, I feel like I understand the doctor's groove and sort of you come to recognize that like 90% of the cases they see are like the same three or four things over and over. So are you more sticking around for like the trying to find that like last 10%, or is it just helpful to be in that clinical environment? Like how are you finding like value in shadowing?
Yeah, so I think it is a lot different whenever you're a medical student shadowing versus a pre-med. Number one, it's so much easier to find shadowing opportunities because they'll 9 out of 10 say yes, 9 out of 10 times say yes. And I think that they are able to engage with you a little bit more whenever you are a medical student. I think also once you're a medical student, I think having that higher level of knowledge, you're able to ask more like detailed questions as well. I don't know. I feel like just being in that environment, you're learning so much already too. Seeing kind of the workflow, seeing what you do like about a specialty and what you don't like. I think those are things that are able to really shape your perspective with your future specialty choice, definitely. And if you really, really do like a certain specialty, I think it'll take you so far if the attending knows that you are serious about that. And I think for the most competitive specialties, they want to see commitment. I know for the orthopedic surgery program director, that's what she emphasized. Like, if you are serious about orthopedic surgery, I want to see you here. And if you're out here on weekends, I want to see you here all day. So just being there and showing that you're committed to even being in that environment, I think goes a long way for people that want to go into those competitive specialties.
Yeah, so you've been in rotations for a while now. And so I was just wondering what's been some of like your favorite rotations so far, and which are the ones that you're looking forward to in the future?
Yeah. So I was actually very surprised, but my favorite rotation by far has been my family medicine rotation. There was just something so special about the doctor that I was following and how close he was with his patients, how much he was able to fight for his patients, the relationships that he had with the entire family, and just the preventative care aspect for me, I thought was like super cool. I definitely like outpatient medicine way more than I like inpatient medicine. And I think that's important to figure out early. Um, so I thought that was super cool. And then for OBGYN, I got kicked out of like 60% of rooms. I think it's because I'm a guy. I also had like a super creepy mustache I was growing in November, so they probably didn't like that either. But I also really liked being in the OR as well. So that's something that I realized by being in rotations and being in the OR every single day for 2 weeks, that I really liked being in that environment. And I think if you all are able to figure out early on if you like being in the OR versus being in the hospital versus being outpatient, I think that'll really help you by the time you're a first year medical student.
Yeah, I think that's pretty cool. More recently, I've seen videos on like medical students who, like when they're first matriculating or like during their white coat ceremony, they declare like one specialty
Mhm.
and just how low, just how few people manage to like follow through with that specialty just because you see like once you start your clinical rotations, like you see so many things and like oftentimes you're surprised by that specialty or by you discover something new that you might not have found interesting beforehand. So I think you saying that family medicine ends up being like your top your top rotation from this past year has been pretty cool. Um,
I think the statistic is that 70% of people switch what they switch, like they switch by the end of third year what they decide to apply to.
Wow. Okay, 70%.
It's
I
like
didn't know that was a
significant.
number, but
Mhm.
I think that's a good testament to, I mean, the way the system's working now, like people aren't like quite so, they don't have like tunnel vision necessarily.
Yeah, I think it is easy to say you want to do like the coolest thing ever, but odds are not many people are going to go into like pediatric, cardiac, neurosurgery or whatever that they say that they want to go into first year.
Right, right. So on the topic of medical school, once again, I think we've like exhausted the majority of that, unless there's anything else you want to talk about.
No, I'm all I gotta say is like it's been the best few years of my life so far. So yeah, it's been amazing.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think it was very interesting to hear how you can simultaneously describe it as trying to drink from a water hose, but also the best years of your life. So I think it's very gives us a lot of optimism.
Mhm.
And something I wanted to transition to, I think it's very special having you on here, a very like young voice in medicine, is more some of the movements and some of the changes that we've seen to the field more recently. So yeah, like I said, I feel like there's a lot more action to make medicine more humane. And oftentimes they want to start this training like during medical school and even earlier. Like I see little things pop up even as an undergraduate. And like I said, like taking medical humanities. So I was curious how, so like if you have any insight or any experience, um, there's talk of like reforming medical education to like reduce stress and burnout, integrating empathy into the training and like assessing it.
Mhm.
So That's kind of a loaded question, but does that make sense?
Yeah, I think at least for us, we do have a lot of those classes. There's a class called ICM, which is Intro to Clinical Medicine, where we do prioritize the humanities in medicine and how to be an empathetic doctor. And I do see that being on the forefront of a lot of medical education now is trying to make sure that people are taking care of themselves because you can't take care of other people if you're not taking care of yourself as well. Um, and I do think that that's at the forefront of medical education currently. I think as far as medical school goes, I think it's definitely hard. It has to be hard. But honestly, I think that if you can make it into medical school, you can make it through medical school for most people. One of the reasons why I've loved medical school so much more than undergrad is because I felt so much more connected to the professors. Like they'll make sure that they sit one on one with you if you are struggling with any topic at all. They genuinely like want to see you succeed. And I don't think I had that same connection with my professors in undergrad. I think the bigger issue is with residency, with how stressful that is. And that's going to take a lot longer to move the needle on how residency works. I know some places are already starting to have like strikes and walkouts and stuff like that. Buffalo is one, and I know George Washington's another school that started to have walkouts recently because they're not getting paid nearly enough for like the living wages in those cities, and especially compared to neighboring institutions. So I do think that that's something that's going to be on the horizon for sure.
Right. I think it makes more sense that the movement, like the push, is a little bit slower in like residency, just because, yeah, like sort of as you grow up, as you get older, I think it becomes a little bit harder to like resist these structures that are in place. And I think you sort of like talked about it a little bit beforehand in terms of like physician burnout. And obviously, there is a physician shortage in the country now. And you said it yourself, if you can't take care of yourself, you certainly can't take care of other people.
Mhm.
Do you feel that the culture is shifting right now, and how open is maybe like your medical school on like discussing mental health, and yeah, do you feel like it's stigmatized?
Yeah, at least there are some specialties that are moving very fast in that realm. For example, psychiatry, for example, like dermatology, they definitely have a better lifestyle, and that's why they're the lifestyle specialties. But for specialties like surgery, I just feel like they're gonna be so slow to move the needle on that because a lot of the people that are currently in charge of those programs, they believe that, you need to like be at the hospital 24 hours in order to be a good surgeon, right? And so it's going to take some time for that kind of culture to fade out. But I do think a lot of the younger generation, like our generation, I think that's the fight that they're currently having, and they are wanting to push for more humanity in medicine, definitely. But like I said, it's very, very much specialty dependent. There are some where that's like you need to go take a day off and stuff like that. But there's some where it's just like super toxic and you're just gonna be your life is your work basically. And they're gonna say like that's what you signed up for. You knew what you're getting yourself into, right? It also depends on the institution you're in as well. So there's a lot of different factors. What was the second part of your question?
So I think you've covered the first part in terms of like how fast or slow we think the culture is going to shift, but more so acknowledging like mental health. At your school specifically, do you find that it's very stigmatized, or is there like a wealth of resources in terms of like addressing mental health issues?
Yeah, so I know at my school, at least, there's a mental health counselor that anyone is welcome to see free of charge. But as far as mental health goes, I think that if you do need time, I do think that they would rather you take the time that you need and take a break from school because that has been an issue for some people, across the country. But I know at my school specifically, where they just had to take a leave of absence. And if you do have to take one, they're super supportive of that. But I think that's just all you can do now because it's hard to keep up with the pace of material if you do need to take some time off, unfortunately. So I think at least at U of L, they treat it the same as if it was like any injury where you just couldn't keep up with the studies. You just have to take some time off and then come back next year, essentially.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that you can really see the difference in culture between the specialties. I'm an EMT, and I know the mental health issue has been something that's been really stigmatized, especially in this field for so long. But it's been kind of nice to see the shift when I was in training, and now, like as I'm working, that at least for me, I haven't felt like they've kind of looked down on you for having any mental health issues related to the job. So it's nice that that's kind of shifting. Since we are running out of time, I do want to finish up with our last question. So, can you kind of describe what the day in the life of, a third year medical student is, and just kind of like walk us through your day?
Sure, sure. Do you want me to go through like a certain specialty or the worst one, the best one?
You can pick whatever specialty you want.
Okay, I'll pick the best one and the worst one, and I'll just like speed
Okay,
run it.
cool.
Okay, the worst one by far is surgery. So for surgery, you have to get up at 3 a.m. and then get to the hospital by 4 a.m. and you're there until 5 p.m. But every 4 days, you have 28-hour call where you have to be at the hospital for 28 hours. And you have to do that for 2 months. So whenever you're there, the first thing you have to do is you have to go around the floor, see all the patients, make sure they're doing okay, and then you have to write the list. So basically, you go through each patient and then check their lab values, you check their vitals, and put it next to their name, and then you hand it off to the resident. After that, whenever there are cases, you go into the OR, you scrub in, and you assist however you can. That could be like cutting sutures, that could be putting chest tubes in, that could be suturing at the end of a case, stuff like that. But you're really there to kind of see the environment and stuff like that. And then after you're done with that, say you're done at like 5 p.m., you go home, chill for a second, and then you have to study. So you're doing like, think like 30 to 40 practice questions a day, something like that. So it's not terrible. It's not terrible. And then that's all for one day, basically. So that's the roughest one, like by far. And then the most chill one, I would say for me so far has been geriatric psych. I got to the hospital at 8 o'clock. I went to go see my patients. So I was seeing like 2 to 3 people a day. They were like the cutest thing. They were the cutest people ever. Like one of my patients was like dating another patient, like writing notes and stuff like that. It was like super cute. After you go see them, you go write your note, and then by 9:30 you're done, and then you have the rest of the day off. So that was the chillest one for me by far.
Wow. Wow, that's
Night
very
and day
impressive.
difference, right?
Yeah, night and day. It's incredible to think that these people have like the same degrees, but it really just goes to show you how different like your practice of medicine can look just
Mhm.
depending on what you're interested in.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So that is, I think, something that a lot of people our generation are considering a lot more than the previous generation. We really do care about our life outside of our careers, and that's like at the forefront of my mind too, because I want a family one day. I want to see my kids grow up. Um, but whenever you do shadow, whenever you do talk to, whoever in medicine that you're talking to, I think that's a great question, asking them what their day-to-day life is like, because you kind of get a glimpse of what your life might look like if you're in that situation in the future. I know for me, whenever I talk to a CT surgeon, he looked me in the eye and said, "So you want to do CT surgery?" Well, I want to tell you that I'm the only one out of all 10 doctors here that isn't divorced and has kids. So keep that in mind if you decide to do CT surgery. Odds are you're either going to be divorced or you're not going to have kids. And I was like, "Oh, well, that doesn't sound like for me." So really important stuff to think about.
Yeah, I think that's something, yeah, very, very important to keep in the back of your mind because um yeah, at least for me, and I think Jada can relate too, it comes down to having to ask yourself like pretty difficult questions about like your priorities because of course you dedicate over a decade of your life to your studies and your passion for medicine, but
Mhm.
at the same time you have to decide like, like do I want to become a cardiothoracic surgeon, which is something I've always dreamed of, but like at what cost of developing myself personally and in the context of like having a family and stuff like that. So yeah, very tough questions to have. Yeah, I think Roland, we're out of time, but I just wanted to say that we've definitely appreciated hearing your insight on the more like non-linear approach to medicine. I think sometimes it's often portrayed as like cut and dry or like checking boxes as you described, but I think it's very promising to hear that like medicine is becoming more accepting of people from like different backgrounds and different interests, which I think will, go a long way in terms of like patient care, but also just the physician experience as well.
Mhm.
So yeah, thank you once again for sharing all your wisdom with our listeners. And it's been great talking with you.
Of course. Best of luck with everything. I feel like you two definitely have some great heads on your shoulders and are going to do amazing at whatever you do. You all asked some really great questions, and I know you're helping out so many people with this podcast. So I appreciate you all for having me on as well.
Big thanks to Roland for taking the time to chat with us today and for sharing his story. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe to Stories Behind the Scrubs.
And if you liked what you heard, don't forget to leave us a review, share this episode with a friend, and follow us on Instagram at Stories Behind the Scrubs. We'd love to hear your thoughts and any questions you might have for our guests.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.